So we're going to talk about contextual safeguarding. And this is what we plan to talk about for the next 50 minutes or so. Who we are, a bit of housekeeping, thinking about what you know already about contextual safeguarding, a brief outline of what it is. We have a video where you can share some thoughts. We're going to talk about the heads or the shades assessment, exploitation, county lines, things to consider with exploitation, how to talk to an adolescent, some take-home messages, some information and resources, and some questions. And also we do have, like Nijat had mentioned, we put details of the survey on the back page as well. If people could answer that before they leave, that'd be great. Thank you so much. So hopefully that's okay. You still with me, Charisse?
I am.
Yay! It's so weird hearing you and not seeing you. Okay, hang on, I'm just waiting. Just press next. It's a little bit slow, this slide. 2 secs. Let's do it again.
Can everybody hear us? Do like little thumbs up in the chat or in the video. Perfect. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, Alice.
Loving the audience participation. Thank you. Okay. Do you want to do this bit, Charisse? Or should I do this? What do you reckon?
Go for it. It's your slide. I don't want to steal it.
All right, then I'm going for it. So who are we? Well, we're both registered social workers, currently based at UCLH. We're NHS funded, so it's quite an unusual role. We're not from any local authority, but we do have heaps of local authority experience. Both of us have been in local authorities for a number of years. So we have that experience. Our main job at the moment is working with adolescents, so that's age 13 to 19 years of age. The main bulk of our role is liaising with local authorities, maybe the police as well, and obviously colleagues at UCLH and perhaps other hospitals, and really managing safeguarding risks with young people, thinking about how to keep them safe, trying to get them home for a safe discharge where possible. And we sit on lots of different MDTs, so multidisciplinary team meetings, and we're part of lots of different kind of multi-agency decision making. That's kind of what we do, isn't it, Charisse?
Yeah, in a nutshell. I'm just paying attention to the chat. Can everybody see the slides? Okay, let me just have, all right. So Steve, can you see the slides now? Perfect. All right. Sorry, Farah.
That's what it's like doing a radio, phone.
Okay. So okay. Just moving on to sort of some housekeeping, if you could all keep yourself muted. I think Farah's muted you for now. If you've got any difficulties, just use the chat facility as you are already. Sort of any questions, if you can keep them to the end, great. But if we see them popping up and it's sort of relevant to the slide, we'll answer it there and then. Is that okay? Great. Cool. Is there anything else you want to add for housekeeping, Farah?
No, I was just going to say, Charisse, maybe if you just do what you've done and just keep an eye on that chat to make sure it doesn't, there's nothing we're missing, that'd be great.
Right. Okay.
Thanks. Brilliant. Okay, so what do you know about contextual safeguarding? I'm wondering if we wanted to open this up to people before we talked about it, and wondered if people wanted to write in the text box kind of what they already know. And if you don't know anything, it's fine. You can say actually nothing. I just wondered if people wanted to write a couple of words about what they already know about contextual safeguarding.
Okay, let's see.
Don't be shy. And it might be that actually people don't know, which is absolutely fine.
Okay. Right. The chat's gone silent, but people are still rolling in. So let's power through.
Okay. Let's go through. Okay. So.
I'm hungry.
Yeah. Okay. So this is taken from the Contextual Safeguarding website. The link's at the bottom. Actually, myself and Charisse, we both love this website. It's a really good website to look at. I'll let you just read through that definition. That is what's on their website currently. It gives you a nice bit of a blurb about what it is. I'll give you a couple of seconds to read through that.
And we've got some comments from Nijat that it's safeguarding concerns that are seen outside the family home. It's very important, particularly for the teenage age group and young adults. and it's looking at the young person within a wider context. Thank you, Najat.
I think you quite often maybe share the bit that you normally share, you know, about kind of like maybe how sort of child protection conferences are kind of normally run and how they look different from a contextual safeguarding perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, both Farah and I come from a social work background. We're not medical professionals, and the way social work, particularly in terms of child protection, works, the system is set up to tackle abuse from within the household. And now what we're seeing, I mean, more than now, for the last sort of 5 years, we're seeing a lot more peer on peer, so violence and sort of abuse from outside of the home, and it tends to be peers to peers rather than sort of parent to child. So the current system in place isn't effective or as effective as it would be if looking at sort of abuse in the home, when considering sort of the risks to young people in their communities and the spaces that they sort of move between. So like schools, the community, clubs, etc.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sharice. Okay, let me move on. So just so that you know, really, like it says in this slide, it is referenced in statutory guidance. So in the Department for Education, which is working together for safeguarding children, guidance that all of us adhere to, and also your GMC guidance as well. It's referenced in there. There's also quite a lot of information on the NHS sort of safeguarding app. It's embedded in there. And I know NHS England are profiling the intercollegiate document about training and competencies and making sure they're kind of being thoughtful about contextual safeguarding and trauma-informed care, and making sure that's relevant. So it's not just a kind of a social worky thing. It is something that's relevant to kind of all multi-agency professionals, of which you guys are absolutely included in that.
Yeah, and particularly I think health professionals in general have a real window of opportunity that they don't necessarily know about, and hopefully that might become clearer as we go on through the training.
Thanks, Louise. Okay, so we've got a video coming up. Before we show the video, these aren't questions that you didn't need to answer all of them, but these are questions that we want you to think of when you're watching the short video we're about to show. So what's happening to the young person? What are the risks? Any protective factors? Any vulnerabilities? What support could the young person benefit from? And how could this young person be supported to keep safe? So just a few of those things to think in your head whilst you're watching the video, and you can pop your thoughts in the chat box, and we'll have a little discussion about that afterwards. Okay, fingers crossed this will work. Let's have a little look.
Good, yeah. Be quiet.
Right, hang on, I need to share the screen again.
Just for new people joining, please mute your mics.
Thanks, Louise. Okay, right, I've got the video now.
Perfect. Not hearing any sound.
You're not hearing any sound?
No, no sound.
That's a shame. Okay. Bear with, have a look. No, I can't quite figure out how to put sound on this. For me, I've got sound on it. Can you just text if you can hear?
You have to go if you go onto YouTube.
Yeah.
In the corner of the screen, there's normally an icon that you can lift up that would have the sound. Like if you drag it up, so in the corner, it should be the right-hand corner at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah.
There's no. Oh, the left-hand corner. Sorry.
Yeah, mine's showing that it's up and it's loud.
Let's see if I can help. Give me a second.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for bearing with. Oh, right, yeah, someone suggested about sending the link on YouTube. I will do that. Thanks, Najat. I think people are watching it on YouTube, so if you can go to the link Najat sent, that'd be great.
J-A-Y-J. J's my guy. We met.
Oh, I heard that, Sharice.
That was my phone, sorry.
It's all right. Najat's put in the YouTube link, so if people could have a look at that, that'd be great. And you do need the sound with it, really. Hey, you are. Hi, everyone. Did people get a chance to look at the video on YouTube? Oh, thanks, guys. That's great. Okay. Let me go back to sharing my screen. It'd be good just for you guys to put your thoughts in the box about what you thought about the video. Let me put this one back on.
Amazing. So everybody's had a chance to watch it. Maybe I'll start whilst people are still responding. But I think one of the things that kind of strikes me is the time in frame in which it's happened, and obviously the video is a short clip, condensed, but I think it shows the process quite well of what we would, as professionals, would say is grooming. I've got exposes the vulnerability of young people and the difficulties of helping, the level of risk. And that somebody has said, so Noella has said that it's a case of child sexual exploitation, which is exactly what we as professionals would sort of label it as. And I think young people struggle with that terminology. And I suppose you can see why in the video, the sort of steps to breaking that young person down.
Also, the interesting thing about this video for me is that for a long while we've been watching this video and it's called The Story of Jay, but actually when you think about it, it's the guy's name that's Jay. This young person is still kind of not even named, is she? She's still kind of, we don't know who she is, and that as well I think is quite powerful too, really. So yeah, and I think the term child sexual exploitation is absolutely right to name it like that, rather than just like a lifestyle choice that she's made, which could be another interpretation that people might make.
And then just moving back to the chat, so the child has been isolated from support mechanisms, family, school, friends, and that's a really important point to make, I guess, because that makes it even more difficult for that sort of system to then be penetrated if that young person isn't able or isn't accessing sort of some of those safer spaces and networks. And somebody else has said it shows how a child can be picked up and be used to push their support away. So like themes here, difficult to intervene when she doesn't understand that she needs help. Yeah. And what about some of going back to some of the questions that are in the slides before? What do you think? How could this young person be supported to keep safe? How would we feel as professionals to maybe enable some sort of safety for this young person? Do we think we could in our roles?
I actually think that doctors have got a huge role, haven't they, to play sort of within this. If there's a young person who presents to kind of a hospital and they're presenting in a way where you feel that they've been exploited and it's not a safe place to go home, there are options for you, such as, for instance, admitting them to stay overnight or stay, for a short period of time to be able to kind of gather the information to maybe alert the police to kind of do those sorts of things. So there are things that all of us can do. And we've got some more slides later as well about other things that we can all do as professionals and as doctors to try and keep young people safe.
Yeah, and we've got here sort of opportunity, so we could educate her about sexual health. There's somebody else has said that we can explore her health needs such as STIs, pregnancies, unmet health needs, advocate for them. If she presents say pregnant, you could explore the background for a heads assessment, which is fantastic. Thank you, Kat, because we'll be talking a little bit about heads for those who don't know, and involve other agencies. So yeah, these are the sort of things that we see happening on our ward, and it's good to know that you guys are aware of them as well. She needs to know who she can turn to when she feels backed into a corner and left with no support. So I guess having that sort of safety adult or friend figure in the picture. Thanks, Fran. Okay.
So you were talking about people were talking about child sexual exploitation, which isn't the only type of exploitation. So also criminal exploitation, child criminal exploitation, sometimes we shorten that to CCE, and child sexual exploitation we might shorten to CSE. And criminal exploitation could be any of those things that are written down there, really, sort of young people perhaps who are sort of caught up in sort of car washes, at the back of nail bars. We had one recently, didn't we, Sharice, where the young person was in the back of a sort of a restaurant, which may or may not have been criminal exploitation, and also kind of moving sort of drugs from A to B as well, just in terms of thinking about young people being exploited in that way. And that leads us on to a little bit about county lines shortly. Yeah, just before we go on to that, just thinking about, child criminal exploitation and thinking about what some of the pull factors might be for young people. Could be about children receiving something or a sense of safety. An advantage for young people could be financial, and the control, really. Young people might not always recognise that they're being controlled or they're being threatened, but actually quite often it's not as easy for them to kind of leave, really, and stop doing what they're doing, which means that they're kind of being exploited, really.
And I think as well, it was really good to see that people identified from the story of Jay that child sexual exploitation is exploitation, and we kind of see it that young people are being abused and they're not what was considered some years ago as child prostitutes and things like that. And I think the difference between CSE and child criminal exploitation is just we're not quite there yet in all organisations thinking about children as victims, and sometimes they end up being sort of criminally responded to in a criminal way instead of sort of victims of exploitation. So I think the video that we're going to watch on county lines kind of give an insight to sort of how we try and tackle that, and information about what it is. But sometimes young people that have been exploited, especially the ones that we've had on our ward, they're frightened from sort of the people that are exploiting them, but also the law as well. So we need to try and strike that balance.
So this is the link for the video. I will try and play it, but also if you could perhaps get that up in a minute, that'd be great, just because of the technical issues. I think it's also just worth saying that quite often we find that there's a different response, maybe from local authorities and from the police and other agencies for, say, a 17-year-old, which is still legally a child, compared to maybe like a 15-year-old. So it's, and I think that sort of follows on from what Sharice was saying, really, that you know, it's about the response that we give to young people, and we strongly advocate that children are chilled until they're 18, whether they're the upper end of that or lower end, they still need protecting. Shall I try and share this video and see if it works? But if not, that's the link. Let me see. Right, it's this one. Oh, I don't know what that is. Oh.
So Najet's put the link in the chat.
Thank you. I wondered what had happened there.
Thank you. A few of you coming back saying that you've watched it now. So we'll just wait another minute or so.
Hi, is everyone back?
Yeah,
We're all back. Okay. What do people think about the video? I don't know if there's anything in the chat about that. Would it be helpful just to go to the next slide perhaps then?
So there's a suggestion that it's going to get worse post-COVID. And I think we're quite fearful as well, just because we're seeing sort of an emerging picture of young people not coming into hospital due to fears around sort of catching COVID or feeling like A&E isn't a safe place. And we know that things are still happening in the community, but maybe the resources and spotlight isn't necessarily there. So, you know, before sort of COVID, we were hearing a lot about things that were happening to young people, but we're not hearing that, but we know it's still happening. But the support, schools are closed, sort of lots of organisations are doing remote things. So I would agree with that, actually. Probably will get a lot worse. Somebody saying the numbers in Lewisham were quite shocking alone. So you can imagine the picture sort of replicating across other boroughs. And yeah, Sam sort of picked up on what's happening now. And what we know is young people are still sort of being made to go up and down to different areas, trafficking and moving drugs. But I think it's been a bit easier to spot young people. Am I right, Farah? Because trains have been a lot less empty.
Yes, I think there's an article in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago basically saying that lots of these young people are sticking out like a sore thumb now. So many people are working from home and they're looking thinking, oh, who's that teenager over there? They don't live around here, they don't, they're not from this area. So actually that's been positive in terms of letting police know that young people who are not normally in a particular area, maybe somewhere quite remote, somewhere quite rural, are there. But also, I think I've heard recently, you know, there's a thought that, of course, the activity is still happening, but perhaps not on the streets, but perhaps in people's houses. So that's a worry as well, thinking about who's in the house. Is there a vulnerable adult there? Who are the adults there? What's going on? So I think it's a real worry. I think it's a bit of a pressure cooker. So the problem hasn't gone away, like as Sheree said, but it's just not been as reported, I think. And so, yeah, that's a real worry for us. Anything to add on that one?
And somebody sort of mentioned other young people being pushed towards perhaps getting involved in sort of transferring drugs because of poverty and losses in sort of families around jobs. I think as well what we've seen is people are turning towards more sort of drugs, whether that's recreational or illegal, to sort of manage with the times as well. I think there's been a lot more
oh,
sorry, did you mute me? Did you mute me?
No, I didn't, sorry.
Yes, it's just talking about sort of being pushed and pulled towards maybe getting involved in illegal activities just because finances are sort of low. So that's an interesting point. I don't know how we'd measure that, but
I would imagine so, with so many people being furloughed or jobs ending, contracts ending. You know, that's a real worry for families, particularly as we know, like Rhiannon was saying in that clip about kind of poverty being a huge factor. It's just pouring people into kind of more and more challenges, really. And like you said, schools aren't open. I mean, they're obviously open, sort of vulnerable young people, but that's, you know, if you've got an allocated social worker or if you're a child of a key worker, then lots of these young people aren't going to be you know, accessing those youth activities and those schools and those supportive spaces that would normally help support them, really. Okay, so the next slide is really just some things to consider. Have a read through that, see if there's anything that, and you can add to it. It's not an exclusive list. These are some things that we've come up with. The one that says medical investigations, query tox screen, query bloods, knife, and query STI. That was a discussion we had at one time, I believe with Dr. Joe Bejan at UCLH, thinking about, I think there was 2 different young people who'd been stabbed, and there was a thought, actually, what happens if the knife kind of went from one person to another, sort of cross-contamination? So that's, you know, that's what that was about.
Can I ask a question? I don't know. I've had a case coming into A&E, and it was a teenager. I think he was about 14, previously known to social workers. So lots of suspicion about gang activity because he would go missing and he wouldn't have school absences. And he came in with a knife wound, saying that he'd been cutting up vegetables. And it was a wound on the hand which looked more like a defensive wound. So obviously we were really concerned about, was he safe? You know, did somebody attempt to stab him? And we wanted to admit him to gather more information and things, but he just basically refused, and the whole family walked out of A&E. And we did end up informing social workers and calling the police, who just did a welfare check, but they basically just went to his house, he was there, and that was it. So other than informing social services, I mean, is there any other advice for those sort of cases of anything else you can do? Because, I mean, if they do just walk out, we don't have a lot that we can do about it.
Yeah. And I think, is that Susie?
Yeah.
Hi, Susie. I think what in sort of that scenario isn't sort of different to what lots of people have described. And I think the fact that because some people may have just left, you know, he's gone with his family. That's sort of my job done. And I think the fact that you've gone that step further and reported it, and you had, you know, you were curious, he's come in with a wound, it looks like it's a defense wound. Some of the things around, like the time he came in, has he presented at the hospital before? Because we've had young people come in and say, oh, we've fallen down some stairs, or we was play fighting. So there's a record on file as well, and that's more information to share. But the fact that you've shared it with social care is great, because on their system they may already hold information about that young person or the peer group of that young person, and if they get that information from you, they can sort of follow it up. It might not result in any action at that time, but it could later on, or it could add to a wealth of information that they already have. Because unfortunately, sometimes these things happen out of borough. So if the social workers right, we've got a referral from the hospital, we've had a bit of concerns from school, you know, he's not been going to school, and the police are worried about young people in this area, maybe we need to go and do something and visit this family. So I think it's absolutely spot on. That's all that you could have probably done your end, short of sort of dragging him to the ward and keeping him prisoner, which I
think you just illustrating, Susie, how much of a frustrating process it can be, especially when the end result seems like, you know, it might just be a welfare check by the police, which quite often is, oh, look, you're breathing, it's fine. It can be incredibly frustrating, but like Cherie said, it's more of information to go particularly to social care, so that in a longer term, when people are doing things like chronologies, they're looking back, because when local authorities get a referral, what they're supposed to do is look back at all the other information they've got, not just look at the new information in a standalone context. So they should look back and go, oh God, he was at UCLH, and months ago he was at Whittington, and then he was at a hospital in Cornwall, and then, you know, should be joining up the dots. So your information will be really helpful, but it's incredibly frustrating. Yeah.
And the other thing, sorry.
Sorry, no, go.
It's hard when I can't see you. The other thing, I suppose the other thing that we're sort of lucky to benefit from, and I don't know how other sort of hospitals are set up, but we've got Redfred, who sort of use those kind of moments as like a window of opportunity. So they work with young people that have been involved in or on the periphery of becoming involved in sort of gang and violence and exploitation. So that's one organisation, but there's multiple that have been replicated across the country. Safer London is another one. So sometimes, even if, you know, what you could do is pass on that young person's information to that organisation, who will only work with them on a consensual basis. So they might say that they've had a referral because you presented at A&E, and they might just explore that. And because a lot of the professionals that work for these organisations are more relatable to young people, and they're not sort of the police, they're not social care, sometimes young people feel more able to work with that kind of service. And some of them are
and
actually
gang members would they actually go to the so they would make contact with the young person even if, say, they had left A&E?
So what they work on a consensual basis, and what we would do is say either we've got clear consent, or we ask for consent on the basis that it's gone for a welfare check. This is a service that's available. Can this be followed up with that young person? And sometimes what we can do is consult. So we'll have like a consultation with Redfred and let them know the circumstances. And what they might say is, well, we'll be happy to contact the young person and ask them if they'd like a service. But if they say no, then we can't. So it is they're not a statutory service, so they can't enforce their involvement, but when young people are told about them, they're a lot more interested than, say, a child protection social worker. And I can see in the chat, so do you need consent for passing on information to an organisation? So because Redfred sit as part of our safeguarding MDT, we all discuss young people, and if Redfred think that that's a case that they can take forward, then we would think about the best way to follow up with that young person. So I don't know how it works. If it's a separate organisation that you're referring to, that process is going to look differently. You'd have to discuss the referral with that young person, but Redfred actually sit as part of our MDT in our ED department for the person who I think it's Maggie. Did I answer your question, Maggie? Sorry. Farah, for you, it says, do you need consent for passing information to an organisation such as Redfred?
Well, I think that was the question. Yeah, I think you've nailed it on the head, Cherise, what you said, really. And
so St Giles is another one, perfect, at the Royal London, yeah.
And this is the details at the moment for Redfred that you've got up on your screens. I think Redfred, they actually call it a teachable moment, don't they? Because it's that one time when the young people are so vulnerable in lots of different ways, but actually they might have had such a crappy experience and might have kind of been at the, you know, been at the end of serious youth violence where they've really maybe been quite severely injured, and this might be the one time they meet a youth worker who kind of understands where they're coming from and thinks, actually, you know what, I want to do something different, and can you help? And that, you know, that is amazing. Okay, so let me move back on to.
Thank you for that, Susie. Thank you.
Let me move back onto this.
That's great. Thanks for answering my question.
Where did we get to? So we got, we did that one. So now we were just going to talk about how to talk to an adolescent. Do people know about shades and heads? Do people know what that is?
A couple have answered in the chat and referring to it.
Fantastic. For those of you that don't know, these are the acronyms. So actually, I think heads are supposed to have 2 S's on it. Sorry, apologies. So heads is the one that you may hear, particularly if you're at UCLH. And those are the acronyms. It's really a kind of psychosocial, I don't want to say interview, but a conversation with a young person in a confidential space where you're not just talking about the medical stuff, you're talking about all the other things in their lives. And it's not a kind of questionnaire like, how is your home? How's your environment? It's not like that. It's a conversation where you're kind of probably going to allocate, you know, an amount of time where you can have a conversation uninterrupted. and speak with a young person about all the other stuff that's going on in their lives. The reason for the shades is that there was a thought that you'd start more with the strengths, which actually I quite often think if you're doing the conversation properly with young people, you wouldn't probably normally start with all the kind of sort of challenges anyway. You probably would start with, you know, something positive, or thinking about kind of what they might normally be doing if they weren't in hospital today, and things like that. So it's a good way to be able to cover everything really, and it's not something that needs to be done in one sitting. It might be, if you're part of an MDT, that actually really sit down and talk about a young person, that one of the member of the team has spoken to a young person about one area of their lives, and you might have different information, you might put it together and just need to fill in the gaps a bit. And so we found really heads assessments can be really useful, just in terms of, so particularly if you've had young people where they've been like maybe medically unexplained symptoms, or people that have been quite hard to get discharged home, and we've realised actually there's something else going on here, but because people didn't ask the question, you know, who's at home, who do you live with, those sorts of things, we never found out they were sofa surfing, or they were evicted, or whatever. We just kept getting the new medical queries and symptoms. So they can be a really useful tool. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything onto that. I don't know, Sharice, if you want to say anything else.
Alice has added the additional S on heads, social media, just for people not keeping an eye on the chat. And I think one of the things, look, you've already sort of covered this, but it's definitely not asking the question tends to be what professionals can be guilty of. There's lots of sort of assumptions around, or things that we don't feel maybe comfortable about asking, so don't ask those questions. Or we make assumptions, for instance, if it's a young male, that they are in a intimate relationship with a female, and that might not be the case. And young people are usually quite good at answering questions when asked, but they don't always question professionals when they feel like an assumption has been made. So it's important to sort of be open, have a conversation, and even if I know that I've worked well doing them with a medical professional, because, you know, they bouncing off somebody else is helpful, and it gives me a bit of time to think as well. When you do them on your own, it can sometimes feel a little bit more difficult. But permission seeking is always great. You know, I'm going to ask you a few questions that you might feel a little bit uncomfortable, and definitely the conversational approach has been helpful. So just touching on Alice's point around social media, I think particularly in relation to contextual safeguarding, we know that lots of sometimes the threats or aftermath of assaults circulate on social media quite a lot, and it's really important that we're asking young people, because sometimes we think about something that's a physical risk, but actually having a video of you being jumped by 15 people sent to your whole school in under a second, you know, what's the experience of that? It's the sort of the re-trauma of the trauma. So social media is a big one, and we don't always know, you know, what apps and technology young people are using. It moves quite quickly, so to have an understanding and ask those questions is really important, because they're going to be the best educators.
I would also say that as well. I agree with you, Sharice. I would also say that's the same for things like for phrases that people use around sex and things like that. Quite often people will use a word that I might assume that I know what they're talking about, but I might say, what do you mean by that? You know, just so that we're not assuming that we know what I'm trying to think of something, I don't know, a blowjob, most of us probably would understand what that is, but there might be a term that a young person uses, like they say they're hanging with someone, or they say they're linked up with somebody. You know, I think it's quite good to say, what does that mean to you, rather than us assuming that they've got a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or they're in a relationship, or they've had sex, or you know, whatever it might be. So just being really, you know, curious with any aspect, actually. And I think that's how I learn loads of stuff anyway. You ask people, don't you?
There's a question in there with regards to social media. What do you ask to get the young person to open up? And Alice has suggested open up a general chat about platforms used and knowledge about them, closing on something if necessary, talk about online sexting and safety, and then underneath that we've got professional curiosity. And I think that's probably the bread and butter, really. the more you sort of are curious, the more information you're likely to get. I think sometimes when we've got a line of questioning, it shuts down that curiosity. You know, how do you communicate with your friends? Oh goodness me, on it, what's Instagram? I mean, we all know, but there are certain apps that we don't know, and it's how do you meet people on there? So so you don't know them? How do they access your information? I think genuine curiosity, maybe the conversations you might have with your friends or your children, your colleagues about things that you're curious about, is the same thing that I would encourage people to do with young people.
I would agree. I think even quite often when maybe young people are talking about boyfriends or girlfriends, and I'll say, oh, like, have you met them in real life, or do you only know them from online? Because actually sometimes people will talk about a relationship and then you realise they've never actually met them at all. So I think that's quite good to establish. If they say they've got a boyfriend and they're going to see them, sometimes they don't mean physically see them, they mean like see them on Snapchat. So just kind of clarify those sorts of things, because that can have a big implication as to how worried you might be and how you might respond. Does that sound?
And then quick, because there was thanks Najette for the app. So NetAware is a very good app, and the links in the chat. I think as well, Farah and we accessed the digital switch training, and at the moment they're doing online trainings for half a day. And actually it's fantastic because it shows you all the different apps that are current, because obviously that's changing day to day, and lets you have a little bit of fun with them as well. So if you've got some time and you can enroll on the digital switch training, I definitely recommend it. I'm just googling it. We can maybe send the link out to you guys. That's probably going to be easier than me to do it this way, if that's all right. So we can send that. Okay, let's have a look. We've just got some take-home messages. Sorry, Sharice, my screen's gone a bit funny at the moment. Can you read through like the next slide about the take-home messages? Yeah. Thank you. So just touching on some of the things that we've talked about, getting to know one of the things that we do, especially in the local authority, is sort of, and it would be great for you guys as well in the various different locations you work in, is getting to know the area and your local context, connecting with local organisations, particularly around young people, and being aware of what support there is and how to access it. So that could be something as simple as having a leaflet stand in your department. It could be having a list of websites saved on your favourites. However you feel best that you can get that information, it's quite valuable to know. And also there's lots of information online about hotspots where lots of young people may have been attacked, or schools, how many pupil referral units do you have, what secondary schools are there, what primary schools are there. So just getting to know the general area. A good example that we had about just escalating information, so whether that be to the local authority, whether that be to the designated the named doctor or the lead nurse for child safeguarding, or adults if it's a young adult. So knowing where to go and who you can get that information from within your organisation, and what organisations you partner with. So I've heard some of you talk about St Giles, Red Thread, Safer London. So you don't necessarily need consent to get information. You need consent when you're sharing that information with that organisation. So you might want to ring up and say, hey, we've got this young person, what would you recommend? And just being mindful, as we said at the beginning, about abuse and neglect outside of the family home as well as within it, which is the sort of backbone of contextual safeguarding, and advocating for the child protection process to be followed. And I know that's what Farah and I basically do day to day, is trying to get organisations, particularly local authority and the police, to see young people as vulnerable and as victims, rather than sort of dismiss them as making difficult and silly choices, or being just criminals and dismissing them and sending it down the criminal route. We want to make sure that those children are being considered in the same way that they'd be considered if it was their parents abusing them. And that goes for potentially the perpetrator as well as the victim. Yeah, are you back in action, Farah, with the slides? Oh, we've lost her. Sorry, messages got deleted. Should say
Sorry,
good question. Definitely easier to connect with. Yeah. Okay. And the next slide is
Can you see
the
it?
NA. I
Can you see
can't.
it? Okay.
Oh yeah, I can. It's back.
Oh, you
it's
can.
back. You're back.
Yeah. So we could probably add, we could add a couple more to this one, couldn't we? So could add red thread to this one. What was the other one we were saying?
So I'm just looking at. Okay, so there's a question in the chat about whether or not sort of telephone and I guess maybe Zoom and other platforms that we're using during this time, is it easier to reach young people now because of the lockdown?
Well, some of the feedback we've had from some of the young people we work with is yes. Some people prefer to use the platform because young people quite often are used to kind of using platforms where they're face to face all the time, maybe in things like House Party or Snapchat. But you know, some people prefer not to. So it's a mixed bag, really, much like probably the rest of the population.
And I think what we've found as well is for some of the young people that it's fine, but our organisations aren't necessarily moving in the same direction due to things like confidentiality. A lot of these platforms, for instance, House Party, you can add, you know, 5 or 6 people that you don't know can jump into a conversation. So some of these platforms aren't necessarily the best in terms of communicating confidential information. So I guess we're sort of playing catch up with young people, but it definitely feels a bit more easy to reach young people when we're using their platforms. But I guess it's finding a policy that agrees with it. So for instance, I use WhatsApp with my young people and that works a treat, but actually WhatsApp as a platform, I don't think most organisations would recommend it.
And also you're using your work phone, aren't you? Because not everybody has access to a work phone. I know what we've been doing with young people, again, with myself and Sharice with our work phones, is that we've been texting young people and saying, look, can we have a chat this week? And then we've been setting up a time to chat with them, either on the phone or like through Zoom or whatever platform they might prefer. And quite often we find that doing that is helpful because it gets them into a space where they might be more able to kind of talk and get themselves in a space where it's perhaps more confidential. And then when we do talk to young people, we're checking in with them, you know, is this a private space? Can people overhear your conversations? And if they sort of say, yeah, I'm in a room full of 5 other people, we tend to kind of just don't talk about anything that's kind of perhaps quite heavy, or we might just say, look, should we call back another time? So it's just, I think, being quite mindful about having those conversations with young people rather than just launching into a conversation.
Yeah. And then are there any good resources or organisations we can point concerned parents to?
There's a really good one actually. So the mix, not the mix is for young people. There's Parent Line is a really good, if you Google it, Parent Line has got some good information for parents. The NSPCC has some good information for parents. We can add some of these as well onto the slide and sort of send it around if that's helpful. Yeah, there are a number that I could just think of like that. Young Minds is another good one for young people. And quite often lots of these websites have like a bit of an area for parents as well to ask questions if they're worried, or a text facility or a chat facility. So yeah, I'm trying to think. Can you think of any more, Sharice?
I can't remember the name of it, but I remember when we went on a training about there's a confidential line that you can use to report things, but I can't remember the name of it. I will find it and send it to. Do you remember?
I know what you mean. Yeah,
it's a number. You can text it or call it, and it's
got a name. Hang on a minute.
So you can share information maybe about being concerned about your son or daughter or their friends, or young people can, and it goes to Canada before it goes to the place intended to avoid it being traceable, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. I'll find it and send it to Najette, who can circulate, hopefully. I'm seeing nods. But yeah, and just some of the resources we mentioned, like the Contextual Safeguarding Network website, you can sign up and that's got lots of helpful information in there. And it's got sort of worksheets, it's got studies, it's got a lot of information. The Metropolitan Police has information, but that's more, again, looking towards like the criminal route. What was the digital switch training? So the digital switch training was it's provided by Google in partnership with Redthread and Catch-22, and it basically focuses on social media and the positives and I suppose the challenges. Without giving too much away for people that are going to do the training, it gives good insight into some of the apps that young people use, why they might use them. It also helps us to think about how we can report things both within the app and also to sort of agencies like the police. I think a lot of people forget that crimes that are taking place or being shared on social media should be reported to the website itself as well as the police, but that doesn't always happen. So it's a really good training. I'd advise you all to go on it. There's lots of interactive things, and it gives you get a leaflet of all the different apps and actually activities that you can do with young people, and parents could do them with young people as well. I couldn't see a reason why they wouldn't or couldn't.
So we'll have the link. We'll give the link to Najat, Cherie. So we'll give the link to Najat for that, because it is really worthwhile training. You won't get a free lunch because it's digital at the moment. Sharice did, but I didn't.
Ladies, I'm just conscious of time.
Yes, that's the end of our slides.
Yeah.
Sorry, Najat, we have finished. So
I just wondered if anyone had any questions before we say goodbye. We've had some really good debate as we've gone through, but did anyone have any other burning questions? Put it in the chatty chat. That was brilliant. Thank you, guys, particularly with the technology hiccups. You did well. Everyone, please fill in the feedback, because it's really important, particularly for the fact we've kind of put this together in a bit of a mad dash. And we've got lots of safeguarding things carrying on this week. We've got something on fabricated illnesses, and we've got a lecture from Alice on acute sexual assault, like child sexual exploitation and stuff like that, coming out of the Haven. So thank you all so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Miss you lot. Thank you for the slides.
Yes, I know. Bye.
And thank you everyone for logging in. It's great.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye now. That's lovely.